I pressed my face closer to the depth gauge, squinting at the numbers as they ticked lower with each passing second. 5,000 feet, 5,100, 5,200. Each new reading sent a cold jolt through my chest. "Captain, we're approaching 5,300 feet," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the knot forming in my stomach. "That's well beyond standard operational depth for a vessel of this class. No submarine in the fleet was rated for this kind of descent. Not even the HMP Erebus, despite all its classified modifications. The crushing pressure at this depth made every creak and groan of the hull sound like a warning." Captain Marquez stood behind me, her reflection visible in the darkened viewport glass. Even without turning around, I could feel her eyes boring into the back of my neck. "Maintain our heading, Mr. Chapman," she said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute command. "This vessel is built to handle these depths. Your job is to pilot it, not question its capabilities." I adjusted our trim, compensating for the increasing density of the water around us. The controls felt different down here, more sluggish, as if the sea itself was fighting against every adjustment. "Yes, Captain," I replied, though my doubts remained. I tried to swallow, but my throat caught painfully. The recycled air in the submarine left my mouth uncomfortably dry after hours underwater. The life support systems were working overtime to maintain breathable conditions. But there was always that artificial quality, that slightly metallic taste that reminded you with each breath that you were sealed inside a pressurized metal tube, sinking into one of the most hostile environments on Earth. 5,500 feet now. The pressure gauges were still in the green, but creeping closer to yellow with every 100 feet we descended. I allowed myself a quick glance at the auxiliary screens. The security feed showed 4 different camera angles of our special cargo. Prisoner 37, Kai Olsen. The man sat cross-legged on his bunk in the reinforced cell, eyes closed, hands resting on his knees. If I didn't know better, I'd say he was meditating, completely at peace despite being locked in a pressurized metal box sinking to crushing depths. Kenny Morse stood outside the cell, his broad frame blocking most of the doorway. His hand rested on his sidearm, eyes never leaving the prisoner. Kenny took his job as security chief seriously, especially with a prisoner like Olsen on board. What had this guy done to warrant transport via military submarine? The mission briefing had been frustratingly vague. High-value prisoner, maximum security protocols, need-to-know basis. The usual bureaucratic speak that told us nothing while sounding important. I turned my attention back to the navigation controls. "Captain, we're approaching the coordinates for the shortcut," I reported, pulling up the classified route on my screen. The shortcut was supposedly a narrow channel through the underwater mountain range that would cut nearly 6 hours off our journey time. More importantly, it would keep us hidden from any watching eyes above. The route had come through special channels, marked as eyes only and encrypted with the highest security clearance. "Good. Proceed as planned," Captain Marquez replied, leaning forward to study the navigation display. "This passage will keep us undetected for the remainder of the journey." From her communication station, Mildred Walker suddenly frowned at her readings. "Captain, I'm picking up unusual current patterns ahead," she said, adjusting her headset. "The water movement doesn't match our charts." I checked my own instruments, confirming her observation. The sonar was showing strange fluctuations in the water density ahead of us, patterns that didn't align with any natural formations I'd ever encountered. The readings pulsed in strange intervals, almost rhythmically, which set off alarm bells in my mind. Natural currents didn't behave that way. "Something's not right," I muttered, adjusting our depth to compensate for what looked like increasing turbulence ahead. I felt it before any of the alarms sounded, a slight tremor that ran through the hull. subtle enough that someone less attuned to the Erebus might have missed it. My hands tightened instinctively on the controls. "Captain," I started to say, but my warning was cut short as the submarine lurched violently to port. The sudden movement nearly threw me from my chair. Warning lights flashed across my console as the stabilizer struggled to compensate. My training kicked in immediately. My hands flew across the controls, fingers dancing over switches and dials as I fought to stabilize our descent. The submarine groaned around us, metal straining against forces it was never designed to withstand. "All stations, report," Captain Marquez called out, her voice cutting through the chaos as alarm klaxons began to sound throughout the vessel. "We've got a situation, Captain," I said, fighting with the controls. The steering yoke bucked in my hands like it had a mind of its own. "We're caught in some kind of current. It's pulling us off course. Nothing in the charts indicated anything like this." I wrestled with the controls, trying to angle our bow against the invisible force dragging us sideways. The engines whined in protest as I pushed them to maximum output, but it was like trying to swim against a riptide. "Full reverse thrust," I called out, engaging the emergency protocols, rerouting power to the forward stabilizers. The submarine shuddered as the engines strained against the current, but we continued to be pulled deeper and off our charted course. Red emergency lights began flashing throughout the vessel, bathing the control room in an ominous crimson glow. "Mr. Chapman, get us out of this," Captain Marquez ordered, her knuckles white as she gripped the back of my chair. "I'm trying, Captain," I said through gritted teeth. "But whatever's got us, it's stronger than our engines. I've never seen anything like it." The navigation screens were going haywire, depth readings fluctuating wildly as we were pulled downward. Warning messages flashed across my screen. Hull integrity at 85%. Depth exceeding recommended parameters. "Mildred, send out a distress signal," Captain Marquez ordered. "Already trying, Captain," Mildred responded, her fingers flying over her communications panel. "But something's blocking our transmissions. I can't get anything out." I glanced at the external cameras and felt my blood run cold. Through the murky depths, illuminated by our external lights, I could see something that defied explanation. The water around us wasn't just moving. It was spiraling inward, creating a massive underwater vortex that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness below. The Erebus was caught in its pull, being dragged inexorably toward the center of the swirling waters. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. Within the powerful grasp of the vortex, I could make out shapes, dark silhouettes tumbling in the current. As we were pulled closer, our lights revealed their nature: debris from other vessels. I spotted what looked like sections of hull plating, twisted metal frameworks, and even what appeared to be the broken conning tower of another submarine. "Captain," I said, my voice barely audible over the alarms, "look at the viewport." Captain Marquez stepped forward, her face illuminated by the emergency lights as she stared out into the abyss. I heard her sharp intake of breath as she saw what I was seeing: the impossible whirlpool swallowing us whole, carrying the ghosts of other vessels that had come this way before. "What in God's name is that?" she whispered. I had no answer. The controls had become completely unresponsive now, the Erebus caught like a leaf in a storm drain. The swirling current pulled us toward its center with terrifying force, the debris of lost ships spinning around us in a macabre underwater dance. Through the viewport, I watched as we were drawn deeper into the heart of the vortex, the haunting graveyard of vessels circling us like a warning of what was to come. The entire vessel groaned as the vortex pulled us deeper, metal straining against forces it was never designed to withstand. "Full reverse. All engines maximum." Captain Marquez's voice cut through the blare of alarms. My hands flew across the control panel. Engaging all engines, Captain. I pushed the throttles to their limits, feeling the submarine buck against the current. The deck plates rattled beneath my feet as the propellers fought the swirling force dragging us toward the center. The intercom crackled. Engineering to bridge. Milo Wong's voice sounded strained even through the static. We're at maximum power on all engines. The reactor's running hot, but we're still getting pulled in. Whatever this current is, it's stronger than anything our propulsion can counter. I checked the external pressure gauges. The readings made no sense. They showed fluctuations that defied normal ocean physics. Captain, these readings, they're not matching any known current patterns. Captain Marquez leaned over my shoulder, her eyes narrowed at the viewport. Can we angle the thrust? Try to push us sideways out of this pull? Trying lateral thrusters, I said, adjusting the controls. The Erebus shuddered in response, but the lateral movement was minimal. It's like trying to swim against a riptide. We need to... The rest of my sentence died as the submarine gave a violent lurch. The hull made a sound I'd never heard before, not the typical groan of metal under pressure, but something almost like a vibration passing through us. The sensation ran up through my feet and into my spine. We've entered the center of the vortex, I reported, trying to keep my voice steady as I watched the instruments. The depth gauge had stopped functioning properly, the needle swinging wildly. External cameras, Captain Marquez ordered. I switched the main screen to show the feed from our exterior cameras. Most showed swirling darkness, but the forward view made my blood run cold. What am I looking at? I asked, my voice barely audible over the alarms. The walls of the vortex weren't rock or seabed as I'd expected. They were moving, undulating. The surface had a slick, organic quality that caught and reflected our exterior lights in ways that stone never would. It wasn't geological. It was biological. Those aren't rock formations, I said, the realization hitting me with a wave of nausea. Captain, that's tissue. Living tissue. Captain Marquez stared at the screen, her face drained of color. Are you telling me we're inside something? Before I could answer, Mildred called out from communications. Captain, the sonar's picking up a massive organic structure all around us. It's reading like a digestive tract. The truth crashed down on me with terrible clarity. We hadn't been caught in a vortex. We'd been swallowed. The Erebus, with all her steel and technology, was nothing more than food to whatever Leviathan had taken us in. It's alive, I said, my mouth dry. We're inside a living creature, something enormous. The submarine rocked violently as we collided with something solid. Through the viewport, I saw the twisted metal of what looked like another vessel's hull, crushed and partially broken down by whatever digestive processes were at work in this monstrous gullet. Hard to port, Captain Marquez shouted. I yanked the controls, trying to avoid another collision, but the space was filled with debris. The remains of other ships, other submarines perhaps, all caught in this living trap at the bottom of the ocean. Some were clearly ancient, covered in a coating that might have been coral growth or some kind of biological process unique to this creature. There's wreckage everywhere, I reported, fighting the controls. Other vessels, dozens of them, maybe more. Some looked centuries old. The implications were horrifying. This thing, whatever it was, had been consuming ships for hundreds of years, and now we were just the latest meal. The Erebus scraped against another piece of debris, sending a shudder through the vessel. Warning lights flashed across my console as system after system reported damage or malfunction. Hull integrity compromised in sections 3 and 4, Mildred called out, her voice tight with fear. Automatic seals engaged. Through the viewport, I caught glimpses of our surroundings whenever our exterior lights swept across the cavernous space. What I'd first taken as some kind of coral growing on the walls was actually a combination of organic structures and partially digested remains fused together. The creature had created a kind of reef inside itself, made from the bones of its previous victims. "Captain, I think I see a ledge or shelf ahead," I said, pointing to a relatively flat protrusion jutting from the wall of flesh. "It looks more solid than the surrounding tissue. Might be cartilage or some kind of internal structure. Can we set down there? Get our bearings?" Captain Marquez asked, gripping the back of my chair. "I'll try." Thrusters are still responding, but steering is minimal. I adjusted our angle of approach, trying to use the current within the creature to our advantage. The ledge grew larger in the viewport, a massive ridge of what looked like hardened cartilage, coated with the same coral-like growths that covered everything else in this nightmare space. "Brace for impact," I called out, as it became clear our approach was too fast. The current had us in its grip, and our engines couldn't slow us enough. The Erebus slammed into the ledge with bone-jarring force. The impact threw me forward despite my restraints. My head cracked against the edge of the control panel, and the world went white with pain. I wasn't sure how long I was out. Seconds, maybe. When my vision cleared, chaos had erupted across the bridge. Red emergency lights bathed everything in a bloody glow. The main lights had failed, and several consoles were sparking. The alarms had changed tone, now blaring the distinctive pattern that indicated multiple system failures. "Damage reports!" Captain Marquez shouted, picking herself up from where she'd fallen. A cut above her eye was bleeding freely. "All stations, report!" My head throbbed as I tried to focus on my instruments. Most of the screens were dark or flashing error messages. "Navigation is offline," I reported, testing each system. "Depth control unresponsive. External sensors at 20%. Main propulsion gone." The reality of our situation hit me all at once. We were trapped inside a massive sea creature, our submarine damaged beyond immediate repair, surrounded by the graveyard of other vessels that had met the same fate. Tiffany Morse, our medical officer, rushed onto the bridge, medical kit in hand. "Multiple injuries reported throughout the ship," she said, quickly moving to Captain Marquez to examine her head wound. 3 crew members with serious lacerations in engineering, 1 possible concussion in the mess hall. Nothing immediately life-threatening. She turned to me next, shining a light in my eyes. "You've got a nasty cut on your forehead, Nash. Possible concussion. Hold still." I barely felt her cleaning and dressing the wound. My attention was fixed on the viewport, where our remaining external lights illuminated the grotesque interior of our living prison. The walls pulsed slightly, a slow rhythm that might have been the creature's equivalent of a heartbeat. "Captain," I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears, "we need to face facts. We're inside some kind of ancient deep-sea organism. Something massive enough to swallow a military submarine whole." Captain Marquez nodded grimly as Tiffany finished bandaging her head. "And it's apparently been doing this for centuries, based on the wreckage we saw." I gestured to my darkened instruments. "Most systems are offline. The hull is compromised in multiple sections. Even if we could get the engines back online, I don't see how we could fight our way back out through whatever we came in through." The captain's face hardened with determination. "We're not dead yet, Nash. This thing might have swallowed us, but I'll be damned if we'll be digested without a fight." I looked back at the viewport, at the walls of living tissue surrounding our wounded vessel, at the graveyard of ships that had come before us. We weren't just trapped in the deep ocean anymore. We were trapped inside a monster that had been feeding on human vessels for centuries. my hands clenched on the useless controls. We'd been caught, consumed, and now we were sitting inside the belly of an impossibly ancient creature from the deep. The curved walls of organic tissue pulsed with an eerie rhythm. I turned from the viewport to the few still functioning systems at my disposal. Our situation was bad. Really bad. The primary navigation console was dark, and most of our external sensors had gone offline after the impact. I wiped blood from my eyebrow where Tiffany had cleaned my head wound and reached for the camera control panel. "Let's see what we're dealing with," I muttered, toggling through the external camera feeds. Most showed static, but 3 cameras still transmitted images. I cycled through them, each view more disturbing than the last. The first showed our submarine's damaged stern section, now resting at an awkward angle against what looked like ridged, pink-gray flesh. The second revealed more of the cavernous space around us, littered with the corroded remains of other vessels. The third gave us the clearest view yet, a massive tunnel of living tissue that stretched into darkness in both directions. "Captain, you need to see this," I called out, keeping my voice steady despite the churning in my gut. External cameras confirm we're inside some kind of digestive tract. Based on the structure and appearance, I'd guess we're in an esophageal passage. Captain Marquez moved to my station, her face tightening as she studied the monitor. The wound on her forehead had stopped bleeding, but the bruise was darkening rapidly. "Can you magnify that section?" she asked, pointing to an area where the tissue walls met. I adjusted the camera zoom. As we watched, the massive tunnel began to contract, the walls moving inward in a rhythmic pattern. The motion was slow but unmistakable, wave-like contractions that started behind us and moved forward. "That's peristalsis," I said, remembering basic biology. "The same muscle contractions that move food down your throat. Except we're the food, and this thing is swallowing us deeper." I switched to a different camera angle, confirming my suspicion. The contractions were becoming more pronounced, narrowing the tunnel temporarily before relaxing again. "Captain, I think this creature is starting a digestive cycle. Those muscle contractions are going to push us further down its system, probably toward a stomach-like organ." I pointed to the screen where acidic-looking fluid was beginning to seep from pores in the tissue walls. "And that doesn't look friendly." As if responding to my observation, the submarine groaned, a long, tortured sound of metal under stress. Red warning lights flashed on my remaining operational console. "Hull breach warning in Section 6, I reported, pulling up the schematic. "The fluid's already affecting our outer hull layer." Tiffany Morse was helping an injured crewman to a seat when she heard this. "Acid burns," she said grimly. "If that stuff gets inside, we'll need to set up decontamination protocols immediately." The intercom crackled with static before Chief Engineer Mason May's voice came through, sounding strained but controlled. "Bridge, this is engineering. We've got problems down here. That liquid is eating through our hull faster than standard corrosives. I've sealed off the affected compartments, but it's only a temporary measure." "How long do we have, Chief?" Captain Marquez asked. There was a pause before Mason responded. "At current corrosion rates, 6 hours, maybe less. After that, we'll have catastrophic hull failure." The words hung in the air. 6 hours. I looked around the bridge at my fellow crew members, watching their reactions. Mildred Walker at communications was biting her lip, eyes fixed on her useless equipment. The navigation officer, Ramirez, was frantically trying to reboot his systems. 2 junior officers were whispering to each other, their faces pale. Captain Marquez stood straight-backed, but I could see tension in how she gripped the back of my chair. "Options, people. I need options." What about sending a distress signal? I suggested. If we boost power to the communications array, Mildred shook her head, cutting me off. I've tried everything, sir. Standard radio, acoustic signaling, emergency beacon. Nothing's getting through. She tapped her screen in frustration. The creature's tissue is too dense, and we're too deep. It's like being buried under a mountain. No signals in or out. That hit everyone hard. I watched shoulders slump around the bridge as the reality sank in. No one knew where we were, and no one was coming to help us. We could try to move, suggested Ramirez. The engines are damaged, but... With what navigation? I interrupted, gesturing to my dead console. We'd be moving blind, and for all we know, we'd just push ourselves deeper into its digestive system. The intercom suddenly crackled again, but this time the voice that came through wasn't from any of our crew stations. It was calm, measured, almost academic in tone. "If I may offer an observation," said Kai Olsen, his voice startling everyone on the bridge. "Your predicament presents a fascinating biological puzzle with a potential solution." I exchanged glances with Captain Marquez, whose expression hardened instantly. "How is he accessing the intercom system?" she demanded. Kenny Morse's voice broke in immediately. "He's still secured in his cell, Captain. But he asked to speak with you. Said it was urgent. I patched him through on your standing orders to report any unusual prisoner behavior." Captain Marquez leaned toward the intercom. "This is not the time, Dr. Olsen. Whatever you have to say can wait." "With respect, Captain, it cannot," Olsen replied, his voice maintaining that unnerving calm. "Based on the hull stress sounds and the pattern of movement I can feel even from my cell, I believe you're inside a deep-sea Architeuthis variant. Likely one that's evolved specialized digestive adaptations. I've studied similar specimens, though, admittedly, none this large." I watched Captain Marquez's face as she processed this. Her eyes narrowed in suspicion. "And?" she prompted. "And I believe I can help you escape," Olsen continued. "But I'll need to see the creature directly. I request to be brought to the bridge." "Absolutely not," Captain Marquez said firmly. "You're staying exactly where you are." I turned back to the camera feeds, noticing with alarm that the muscle contractions had intensified. The walls were now visibly closing in around sections of our vessel during each contraction. "Captain," I said urgently, "the contractions are getting stronger. Each one is narrowing the passage by another few inches." I pulled up a quick calculation on my remaining functioning display. "At this rate, the creature will crush parts of our hull within 2 hours, well before the acid does its work." I pointed to the screen where we could all see the massive muscle rings tightening, then relaxing, then tightening again, each time coming closer to our vessel's broken hull. "It's like a python," I explained, constricting a little more with each squeeze. The bridge fell silent except for the continuing groans of stressed metal and the soft beeping of warning systems. Captain Marquez looked around at her officers, her expression grim. "Senior officers conference now." She gestured to the small tactical area at the rear of the bridge. I stood up, transferring basic monitoring to a tablet I carried with me. The senior staff gathered, Captain Marquez, myself as pilot, Tiffany Morse representing medical, and Mildred Walker from communications. Mason May appeared on a video feed from engineering, unable to leave his post with the ongoing hull issues. "Thoughts?" Captain Marquez asked bluntly. Mason spoke first. "We're stuck between bad and worse, Captain. The hull breach is spreading, and we've got critical systems failing by the minute. If this prisoner knows something, anything, I say we hear him out." "He's manipulative and dangerous," Tiffany countered. "That's why we're transporting him in the first place." This could be exactly what he wants, a chance to exploit our crisis. I glanced down at my tablet, which showed the contractions getting stronger. We're running out of time to debate this, I said, turning the screen so everyone could see. Each of those squeezes is putting more pressure on our damaged sections. What exactly is his area of expertise? Mildred asked. Do we even know? Captain Marquez's expression darkened. Marine biology, among other things. His file says he specialized in deep-sea predators before his criminal activities. So he might actually know what he's talking about, I said. Or he might be lying to get what he wants, Tiffany added. Captain Marquez rubbed her temples, clearly weighing our limited options. Another loud groan of metal reverberated through the hull, making all of us wince. We need to do something, Mason insisted through the video feed. Whatever we decide, we need to act now. I checked my tablet again. Captain, we just lost another 2 inches of clearance with that last contraction. Captain Marquez straightened up. Decision made. Kenny, she said into the intercom, bring Dr. Olson to the bridge. Full restraints, and you stay with him at all times. If he so much as looks at anyone wrong, you have authorization to use whatever force necessary. Yes, Captain, Kenny's voice replied. The rest of you, back to stations, she ordered. Let's see what our prisoner has to say, but remember who and what he is. Don't let desperation cloud your judgment. I returned to my station, monitoring the creature's contractions as we waited. The walls closed in a little more with each passing minute, and I found myself hoping that whatever Olson knew, it would be worth the risk of bringing him here. The bridge doors slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Kenny Morse entered first, his hand firmly gripping the restraint controls linked to Dr. Olson's cuffs. The doctor walked a half step behind him, hands bound in front with magnetic shackles. Despite his prisoner jumpsuit and the dire circumstances, Olson carried himself with the same unnerving composure I'd noticed when we first brought him aboard. I kept my eyes fixed on the monitor displaying the creature's contractions, while tracking Olson in my peripheral vision. The tissue walls pulsed with increasing frequency. 63 seconds between contractions now, down from 98 minutes ago. Dr. Olson, Captain Marquez said, her voice tight with restraint. The bruise on her forehead had darkened since Tiffany treated it. You claim to have insights about our situation. Olson's gaze swept across the bridge, taking in the damaged consoles, flashing warning lights, and the external camera feeds I'd managed to keep online. His eyes lingered on the monitor showing the pulsing organic walls. Fascinating, he said, leaning slightly toward the screen. You've been swallowed by Charybdis. Charybdis is a myth, Captain Marquez replied flatly. A whirlpool monster from Greek mythology. Olson smiled, not the reaction you'd expect from someone trapped inside a sea creature with a failing submarine. Many myths have biological origins, Captain. The Kraken was likely based on giant squid sightings. Sea serpents were probably oarfish. And this, he nodded toward the screen, appears to be an undocumented deep-sea organism that creates vortices to trap prey. I toggled to the camera showing the cavernous space filled with shipwrecks. How would you know that? I asked, unable to hide my skepticism. Marine biology was a hobby of mine, Olson replied, turning to face me. Before my other career path. Kenny tightened his grip on the restraint controls. Other career path meaning mass murder. Olson didn't acknowledge the comment, his attention already back on the monitor. The contractions are peristaltic waves, designed to push prey deeper into its digestive system. Judging by the shipwrecks, this organism has been feeding for centuries. A sudden groan of metal interrupted him as the submarine shifted. The pressure gauge on my console jumped, and warning lights flashed across engineering stations. "Hull pressure increasing in sections 3 through 7, I reported, checking the structural integrity monitors. "We've lost another 2 inches of clearance between the outer hull and the organism's walls." Mason's voice came through the intercom from engineering. "Bridge. We're registering microfractures along the port side. The acid concentration is increasing faster than our neutralization systems can handle." Olsen watched this exchange with clinical interest. "Your vessel won't survive much longer," he stated matter-of-factly. "The acid will breach your hull completely within hours, assuming the contractions don't crush you first." "We're aware of our situation," Captain Marquez snapped. "What's your point?" "My point, Captain, is that I can save this vessel and everyone aboard." Olsen's voice remained calm, almost conversational. "But I'll need to be released from these restraints and given operational control." Kenny laughed sharply. "Not happening." "I'm not interested in negotiating with a prisoner," Captain Marquez said. I noticed Olsen's eyes tracking something and followed his gaze to the environmental systems display. The oxygen levels were fluctuating. "Your choice, Captain," Olsen replied, "though I suspect time will change your mind." As if on cue, I felt a tightness in my chest. The air seemed thinner, harder to draw into my lungs. I wasn't the only one noticing. Around the bridge, crew members were taking deeper breaths. Grace May's voice came over the comm from environmental control. "Captain, we have a problem with life support. The acid is affecting our air recycling systems. CO2 scrubbers are operating at 42% efficiency and dropping." "How long do we have?" Captain Marquez asked. "At current degradation rates, less than 3 hours of breathable air," Grace replied. "And that's assuming no further system failures." I checked the external pressure readings again. "Captain, the contractions are increasing in frequency and strength. We're now at 58 seconds between cycles." Captain Marquez's face remained impassive, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes. She turned to Olsen. "What exactly are you proposing?" Kenny stepped forward. "Captain, with all due respect." "I'm not agreeing to anything yet, Chief," she cut him off. "I'm gathering information." Olsen nodded appreciatively. "A prudent approach, Captain." Another alarm sounded, this one from the engineering station. Milo Wong's face appeared on the monitor, streaked with sweat. "Captain, we have a new problem. The acid is affecting the reactor containment systems. The outer cooling lines are showing corrosion." "How long until critical failure?" Captain Marquez asked. 4 hours, maybe less," Milo replied grimly. "We're trying to reroute cooling through backup systems, but they weren't designed to handle primary load." I watched Captain Marquez's face. The reluctance was still there, but it was fading with each new system failure report. Another metallic groan echoed through the hull as the submarine shifted again. "The walls are closing in faster," I said, checking the proximity sensors. "We're down to 8 feet of clearance on the port side." Captain Marquez turned back to Olsen. "Let's hear your plan." "We need to make Charybdis vomit," Olsen stated simply. Kenny snorted. "That's your brilliant plan?" "It's the only viable option," Olsen replied. "We can't fight our way out. We can't survive its digestive process. So we need to make the organism expel us voluntarily." "And how exactly do we do that?" Captain Marquez asked. "By targeting nerve clusters in its throat with a modified electromagnetic pulse from your reactor," Olsen explained. "The organism's nervous system appears similar to other cephalopods, based on the tissue structure I can see on your monitors. If we can trigger the right nerve bundle, we can induce a powerful regurgitation reflex." I looked up from my console. You want to rewire our nuclear reactor to create some kind of biological EMP? Precisely. Olson nodded. Your reactor can be modified to emit a specific frequency that will irritate the creature's sensory nodes. It's the same principle as a person vomiting when the gag reflex is triggered. And you know how to do this? Captain Marquez asked skeptically. I designed similar systems for marine research before I changed professions, Olson replied. The principles are the same, though the scale is different. I pulled up the reactor schematics on my tablet. Even if this could work, we'd need to access the main reactor control systems. Those are hardwired against tampering. Hence why I need these restraints removed, Olson replied. The modifications require precise calibration that can't be done with limited mobility. Another hull breach warning flashed across my console. Section 8 compromised, I reported. Automatic seals engaged, but we're losing compartments faster now. Grace's voice came through again. Captain, oxygen levels dropping to 19.2%. CO2 is at 0.8% and rising. We're approaching unsafe breathing conditions. I felt the difference in the air now. Each breath seemed less satisfying, and a dull headache was forming behind my eyes. Around the bridge, crew members were showing similar signs of discomfort. How do we know this isn't just a ploy to escape? Kenny asked, still gripping the restraint controls. Escape to where, Chief Morse? Olson replied with a thin smile. We're inside a sea creature, thousands of feet below the surface. My survival depends entirely on this vessel remaining intact. Captain Marquez stepped closer to Olson, studying his face. If I allow this, you'll be under constant guard. Any attempt to deviate from the stated plan will result in immediate return to your cell. Chief Morse has authorization to use whatever force necessary. I understand completely, Captain, Olson replied. Now, shall we begin? Your engineer Wong and I will need to work together to modify the reactor output. We'll need to create a directional pulse generator and install it on the forward hull. The submarine shuddered as another contraction squeezed the hull. Warning lights flashed across my console. Hull integrity at 73% and dropping, I reported. We've lost sections 8 through 10 completely now. How long will these modifications take? Captain Marquez asked. 2 hours, perhaps less with proper assistance, Olson replied. I checked the contraction timing again. The creature's digestive cycle is accelerating, Captain. We have maybe 2.5 hours before critical hull failure. Captain Marquez's jaw tightened. She looked from Olson to Kenny, then to the external camera showing the pulsing walls closing in around us. Chief Morse, escort Dr. Olson to engineering. Maintain visual contact at all times, she ordered. Milo, you'll work with him, but verify everything he does. Nash, monitor hull integrity and keep tracking those contractions. I want updates every 15 minutes. Yes, Captain, I acknowledged, turning back to my station. One more thing, Olson said as Kenny prepared to escort him out. We'll need to position the submarine correctly for this to work. We need to target the nerve cluster in what would be anatomically equivalent to the creature's throat. Your pilot will need to maneuver us into position. All eyes turned to me. Can you do it? Captain Marquez asked. I pulled up what remained of our navigation systems. Most were offline, but I still had limited thruster control and the external cameras. I can try, I said, but I'll need to know exactly what I'm looking for. I'll identify the target area once the pulse generator is ready, Olson replied. It should be distinguishable by a concentration of ganglia, nerve tissue bundles that will appear as raised nodules in the organism's flesh. I nodded, turning back to my console to prepare the navigation systems while Olson explained his reactor modification plan to Milo over the comm. The submarine groaned again as another contraction squeezed the hull, and I felt the air growing thinner with each breath. The intercom call from Milo cut out abruptly as a power fluctuation hit the bridge. I leaned forward, studying the forward display that flickered between static and the disturbing image of pink-gray tissue walls. The remaining operational cameras showed what looked like a network of thick, rope-like structures embedded in the creature's esophageal lining. "Look at this," I said, adjusting the image resolution. "These appear to be neural pathways, some kind of massive nerve network running through the tissue walls." Captain Marquez moved beside me, her face pale under the emergency lighting. The cut on her forehead had stopped bleeding but left a dark bruise that stood out against her skin. "Can you map them?" she asked. "Working on it. Most of our external sensors are damaged, but I'm patching together what data we have." I typed commands into the console, trying to isolate the clearest images. "If Olsen's plan has any chance of working, we need to identify the main nerve clusters." The submarine shifted suddenly, metal groaning as another contraction squeezed the hull. The sound reminded me of ice breaking under too much weight, a warning that catastrophic failure was approaching. "Status report," Captain Marquez called out, gripping the back of my chair as the vessel stabilized. "Contractions increasing in frequency," I reported, checking the timer. "Down to 52 seconds between cycles now. That's a 6-second decrease in just the last few minutes." Marquez nodded grimly and turned to the communications station. "Walker, get me a direct line to engineering." Mildred worked her console, hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the stress etched on her face. "Channel open, Captain." "Engineering. This is the bridge. What's your status with Dr. Olsen?" Kenny's voice came through, tight with tension. "We've arrived at engineering, Captain. Prisoner is still secured. Chief May is gathering the equipment Olsen requested. Keep me updated on any progress. Time is not on our side." Marquez released the comm button and turned back to me. "Nash, I need those neural pathways mapped as soon as possible. If we're going to target this thing's nervous system, we need to know where to aim." I nodded, focusing on the task. The bridge felt unusually warm, the air noticeably thinner with each breath. Life support systems were struggling as more sections of the submarine succumbed to the creature's digestive fluids. The main view screen flickered again, and I managed to stabilize the image from one of the few working external cameras. The patterns were becoming clearer. Thick bundles of tissue that branched through the esophageal walls like rivers on a map. "There," I pointed at the screen. "That concentration looks like a major nerve cluster. If Olsen's theory is correct, targeting that area might trigger the regurgitation reflex." The ship's medical officer, Tiffany Morse, entered the bridge, supporting a limping crewman. She helped him into a seat before approaching Captain Marquez. "Captain, we've got 8 more injured from the last compression wave," she reported. 2 with possible concussions, 3 with lacerations from falling debris, and Rodriguez has a broken ankle. "How bad is it in medical?" Marquez asked. Tiffany's face was drawn, dark circles under her eyes. "We're running out of supplies. The medical bay took damage in the last contraction. Lost most of our pain medication when a cabinet broke loose." I watched their exchange while continuing to work on mapping the neural pathways. Each passing minute felt like sand slipping through an hourglass. The hull integrity readings on my console dropped another percentage point as I watched. "Captain," I called out. "Hull integrity now at 68%. At this rate of deterioration, we have less than 2 hours before critical failure." The intercom crackled to life again. "Bridge, this is engineering." Milo's voice sounded strained. "Olsen has started modifications to the reactor control systems. He says he needs more precise data on the creature's neural structure to calibrate the pulse frequency. Nash is working on that now, Marquez replied. Stand by for data transmission. I compiled the sensor readings into a rough anatomical diagram, highlighting what appeared to be the major nerve clusters. Captain, I've got something we can send to engineering, but the data is incomplete. Our external sensors weren't designed to perform biological scans. Send what you have, she ordered. They'll need to work with it. As I transmitted the data, another violent contraction hit. The submarine lurched sideways, throwing several crew members to the floor. Warning lights flashed across my console. Hull breach in Section 12, I called out, reading the alerts. Automatic seals engaged, but we've lost another compartment. Tiffany rushed to help a crewman who had hit his head on a console during the sudden movement. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye as she examined him. That's the third injury in the last 10 minutes, she said, applying pressure to the wound. We can't keep taking hits like this. I checked the contraction timer again. 47 seconds between cycles now. It's speeding up. Captain Marquez stood in the center of the bridge, her posture rigid despite the chaos around her. Nash, keep mapping those neural pathways. We need to identify the optimal target point. I nodded, feeling sweat trickling down my back. The temperature on the bridge had risen several degrees as the environmental systems struggled to compensate for damaged sections. The air felt heavier, each breath requiring more effort than the last. The intercom buzzed again. Bridge. Medical Officer Morse here. Tiffany's voice came through from where she'd returned to the medical bay. We've got critical injuries in Section 5. Need assistance transporting patients. Understood, Marquez replied. She turned to assign crew members to help when another alert sounded from my console. Captain, oxygen levels dropping in Sections 3 through 7, I reported. Environmental systems can't keep up with the damage. She nodded grimly. Redirect any available personnel to help medical. The rest of you, stay at your stations. I returned to my work, trying to ignore the growing headache from the thinning air. The neural mapping was coming together, but slowly, too slowly. Bridge. Engineering. Milo's voice came through the comm again. Olsen says he's making progress on the reactor modifications, but he needs more precise targeting data. The pulse has to hit specific nerve clusters or it won't work. I wiped sweat from my forehead. Tell him I'm working on it. The creature's tissue is dense, and our sensors weren't built for this kind of analysis. The submarine groaned again as another contraction squeezed the hull. The sound of metal under stress echoed through the bridge, a constant reminder of our precarious situation. Hull integrity at 65%, I reported, watching the numbers continue their steady decline. Captain Marquez leaned over my shoulder, studying the neural mapping on my screen. What about that concentration there? She pointed to a dense cluster near what appeared to be a junction of multiple pathways. I zoomed in on the area. That could work. It looks like a major neural hub. If we can target that spot with Olsen's electromagnetic pulse, it might trigger the response we need. I marked the coordinates and sent the updated information to engineering. The bridge fell into a tense silence, broken only by the sounds of equipment and the increasingly frequent groans of the submarine's hull. Tiffany's voice came through the comm again. Captain, we've lost Rodriguez. Couldn't stabilize him after that last compression wave. I saw Marquez's jaw tighten, but her voice remained steady. Understood, Doctor. Do what you can for the others. The death toll was mounting, adding another layer of urgency to our desperate situation. I forced myself to focus on the task at hand, running calculations for trajectory options based on our current position within the creature. If engineering can get that pulse generator working, I said, we'll need to position the submarine as close as possible to the target nerve cluster. Based on our current location, I estimate we'll need to move approximately 20 meters forward and 10 meters starboard. Can we maneuver with our current damage? Marquez asked. I checked the propulsion systems. Auxiliary thrusters are still operational. We won't have much control, but I think I can get us into position. The intercom buzzed again. Bridge, this is engineering. Mason May's voice sounded cautiously optimistic. Olson's modifications are about 60% complete. He's reconfiguring the reactor's electromagnetic shielding to create a focused pulse emitter. Estimated time to completion? Marquez asked. Olson says 90 minutes, maybe less with the parts we've salvaged. I checked the hull integrity readings. That's cutting it close, Captain. At the current rate of deterioration, we have about 100 minutes before critical failure. Marquez nodded. Push him to work faster. Every minute counts. Another contraction hit, stronger than the previous ones. The bridge lights flickered as power fluctuated throughout the vessel. A distant boom echoed through the hull, followed by the sound of tearing metal. We've lost Section 14, I called out, reading the alerts flashing across my console. Hull integrity down to 62%. The air was getting noticeably thinner now, making it harder to concentrate. My head pounded as I worked through the calculations for our positioning, checking and rechecking the numbers. There would be no second chances. Bridge, medical. Tiffany's voice came through again, sounding exhausted. Oxygen deprivation symptoms are showing up in crew members throughout the vessel. Headaches, dizziness, impaired judgment. Understood, Marquez replied. Have them use emergency oxygen when available. I wiped more sweat from my face, blinking to clear my vision as I stared at the console. The temperature had risen another degree, adding to the discomfort of the thinning air. Captain, I said, I've plotted an optimal firing position. If we can maneuver to these coordinates, we'll have the best shot at hitting the main nerve cluster. Marquez studied the trajectory I'd mapped out. Good work. Have the calculations ready to implement as soon as engineering reports the pulse generator is operational. The intercom buzzed again. Bridge. Engineering. Olson says he's identified the frequency needed to trigger the nerve response based on Nash's data. He's calibrating the pulse generator now. Tell him to work faster, Marquez ordered. We're losing hull integrity by the minute. I monitored the few remaining operational systems, watching power fluctuations ripple through the submarine as more sections failed. The external cameras showed the walls of the creature's esophagus continuing to contract, each cycle bringing them closer to crushing the vessel completely. Another metallic groan echoed through the bridge, this one louder and more prolonged than the others. Warning lights flashed across my console. Major structural damage in Section 9, I reported. We're losing integrity faster now. The submarine shuddered continuously as the contractions intensified. The timer on my console showed 42 seconds between cycles. Another decrease. Bridge. Engineering. Mason's voice came through, tension evident in his tone. Olson says we're at 75% completion. He's connecting the pulse generator to the main reactor controls now. I checked the hull integrity readings again. 58%, Captain. We're running out of time. The air felt thick and hot now, making each breath a conscious effort. My fingers moved more slowly over the console as oxygen deprivation began affecting my coordination. I forced myself to focus on the calculations, knowing our lives depended on precise execution. Engineering reports power fluctuations affecting their work, Mildred called from the communication station. They're trying to stabilize the connection to the reactor controls. Captain Marquez paced the bridge, her movements deliberate despite the increasingly dire situation. Tell them to bypass the standard safety protocols if necessary. We need that pulse generator operational. I continued monitoring the creature's contractions, tracking the decreasing time between cycles. 38 seconds now, Captain. The creature's digestive process is accelerating. The sound of metal giving way echoed from somewhere deep in the vessel. The deck trembled beneath my feet as another section failed. Hull integrity at 55%, I reported grimly. Critical failure estimated in 65 minutes. Despite the rising temperature and thinning air, I maintained my focus on calculating our optimal position and trajectory. The neural mapping showed the target area clearly now. A dense concentration of ganglia near what appeared to be a major junction in the creature's esophageal tissue. Bridge, engineering. Milo's voice came through, sounding cautiously hopeful. Olson says the pulse generator is almost ready. He needs the final targeting coordinates. I transmitted the data I'd compiled. Sending now. Tell him the target area is a nerve cluster located approximately 22 meters forward and 12 meters starboard from our current position. As I worked, more distant metallic groans signaled additional failing sections of the submarine. Warning lights continued to flash across my console, but I forced myself to ignore them. Our survival hinged entirely on the precise execution of Dr. Olson's plan, and I needed to ensure we had the exact coordinates and trajectory calculated. I'll identify the target area once the pulse generator is ready. Olson's voice came through unexpectedly, having apparently taken the comm in engineering. It should be distinguishable by a concentration of ganglia, nerve tissue bundles that will appear as raised nodules in the organism's flesh. The hull creaked ominously around us as I continued working on the final calculations, every second feeling like it might be our last. The bridge doors opened as Dr. Olson walked in with Captain Marquez and Milo Wong flanking him. Even in restraints, Olson moved with an unsettling confidence. 2 hours had passed since they'd left for engineering. 2 hours of me staring at monitors, tracking the creature's contractions, while trying not to think about our dwindling oxygen. "It's ready," Captain Marquez said. Her uniform was stained with sweat, and dark circles had formed under her eyes. "Olson will explain what we need to do." I glanced at the external display. The contractions had increased to 1 every 38 seconds. The walls of tissue pressed closer with each cycle, and our hull integrity had dropped to 42%. "Time's running short," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead. The air felt like soup, hot and thin. "What's the plan?" Olson stepped forward, his restraints jingling. "We've modified the reactor to generate a focused electromagnetic pulse. Think of it as a neural disruptor, but scaled up significantly." Milo nodded, his face grim beneath smears of grease and sweat. "We've rigged a pathway from the reactor's cooling system to channel energy through a modified communication array. It's not pretty, but it should work." "Should?" I asked. "It will work," Olson said flatly. "But only if we target the correct nerve cluster and time it precisely." Captain Marquez motioned to the main display. "Show him the target, Nash." I pulled up the external camera feed I'd been studying. "I've been mapping the neural pathways throughout the creature's digestive tract. There's a concentration here." I pointed to a pulsating mass visible on the starboard camera feed. "It's a cluster of ganglia that seems to connect to the major nerve pathways." Olson leaned closer to the screen. "Yes, that's it. Those are sensory nodes that regulate the swallowing reflex. If we hit them with a strong enough pulse, it should trigger the opposite response." "Making it vomit," I said. "Exactly." Olson turned to me. "You'll need to manually target the pulse. Our targeting systems aren't designed for biological targets. Another contraction hit. The submarine groaned, metal bending under pressure. Warning lights flashed on my console. Hull integrity at 38%, I reported. We have maybe 20 minutes before critical failure. Milo stepped forward. The pulse generator is ready, but we need to route targeting control to your station. Do it, Captain Marquez ordered. Milo hurried to my console and pulled out a panel underneath. He worked quickly, connecting cables and rerouting circuits while I kept my eyes on the creature's neural map. There, Milo said, sliding out from under the console. Targeting control is now at your station. Mason is standing by in engineering to initiate the reactor sequence when you're ready. I studied the new controls that had appeared on my screen. A targeting reticle now overlaid the camera feed, allowing me to aim the pulse with precision. The energy needs to hit this exact spot, Olsen said, pointing at the screen. See how it pulses? That's the regulatory center for its swallowing reflex. Hit it with enough force, and it should trigger an involuntary expulsion response. I moved the targeting reticle over the pulsating mass. Got it. Not yet, Olsen cautioned. The timing is crucial. We need to fire during a contraction, when the nerve cluster is most active and vulnerable. The submarine shuddered as another wave of pressure hit us. The hull creaked dangerously. Hull integrity at 35%, I reported. Contractions now at 35-second intervals. Captain Marquez activated the intercom. Engineering. What's your status? Ready to initiate reactor sequence on your command, Mason's voice replied, strained but steady. But Captain, this will push the reactor beyond safety parameters. We'll have maybe 3 minutes after firing before we need to shut down or risk a meltdown. Understood, Captain Marquez said. She looked at me. How's our targeting? I fine-tuned the reticle, making minute adjustments as the creature's walls pulsed. Locked on target. But if those walls keep closing in, we might lose our angle. Then we need to do this now, she said. I opened a direct line to engineering. Mason, I need you to walk me through the firing sequence. First, initialize the pulse generator, Mason instructed. Toggle switch on your left, then enter authorization code Alpha 79 Delta. I found the switch and flipped it, then typed in the code. My console hummed as new systems came online. Now route power to the targeting array, Mason continued. You'll see a power distribution panel on your screen. I located the panel and adjusted the sliders, channeling power from non-essential systems to the pulse generator. Reactor temperature rising, Mason reported. We're approaching critical threshold. The submarine rocked violently as another contraction hit. Warning alarms blared throughout the bridge. Hull breach in Section 14, Mildred called out from communications. Automatic seals engaged, I confirmed, watching indicators on my panel. But we're losing structural integrity fast. Olsen stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the target. You need to wait for the next major contraction. When the walls start closing in, the nerve cluster will become more exposed. I kept my hand steady over the firing control, watching the pulsating mass on the screen. Sweat trickled down my neck and soaked through my uniform. The air felt impossibly thin now, each breath a conscious effort. 30 seconds to next contraction, I announced, checking the timing pattern I'd established. Engineering reports reactor at 90% of modified capacity, Mildred relayed from communications. They can't hold it much longer. It has to be the next contraction, Captain Marquez decided. Everyone brace for impact. The seconds ticked by, each one stretching impossibly long. My finger hovered over the firing control, muscles tense and ready. 10 seconds, I counted down. 5, 4, 3. The submarine lurched violently as the next contraction began. The walls of living tissue pressed inward with crushing force. "Hull integrity at 28%, Mildred shouted. "Target exposed," I called out, seeing the nerve cluster bulge outward as the walls contracted. "Reactor at maximum output," Mason's voice crackled over the intercom. "We can't hold it." "The pulse is ready," I announced, my finger trembling above the firing control. Never in my years of submarine service had I felt pressure like this. Not just the physical pressure of the creature crushing our hull, but the weight of everyone's lives resting on my timing. Another violent contraction hit, even stronger than the last. Metal screamed somewhere aft, and a new alarm joined the cacophony. "Hull breach in Section 16, Mildred reported, her voice tight with fear. I felt the deck plate beneath my feet buckle slightly. The emergency bulkheads slammed shut automatically, sealing off the compromised section. The lights flickered as power fluctuated. "We've lost Section 16, I reported, watching the schematic on my screen. It was unoccupied, but we're down to 22% hull integrity. Captain Marquez gripped the edge of my console, her knuckles white. "On my mark, Wong." I adjusted the targeting reticle one last time, compensating for the submarine's slight shift in position. The pulsating nerve cluster filled the center of my screen, a throbbing mass of tissue that controlled the creature's swallowing reflex. "Reactor stability failing," Mason warned through the intercom. "We need to fire now." The walls contracted again, crushing inward with terrifying force. Alarms blared as more hull breaches registered on my console. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically, but we were running out of sections to lose. "Now, Wong," Captain Marquez shouted. I pressed the firing control. The lights dimmed instantly as power surged through the modified systems. A deep, resonant hum built quickly to a high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. On the external camera feed, I saw a brilliant blue-white pulse of energy erupt from our modified communications array, striking the nerve cluster with pinpoint accuracy. For one terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the entire world around us convulsed. The creature's tissue walls spasmed violently, contracting and releasing in rapid, uncontrolled sequence. The submarine rocked as if caught in the worst storm imaginable. I gripped my console to stay upright, watching in awe as the walls around us suddenly expanded outward, creating space where moments before there had been only crushing pressure. I held onto my console as the world around us continued its violent convulsions. The creature's tissue walls expanded and contracted in uncontrolled spasms, creating a chaotic environment that tossed our submarine like a toy in a washing machine. My eyes darted to the warning indicators flashing across my console, red lights and urgent alerts appearing faster than I could process them. "It's working," Captain Marquez shouted over the din of groaning metal. "The creature's having some kind of seizure." The view screen showed the organic walls around us contorting wildly. Then, without warning, I felt a shift in momentum that pushed me back against my chair. The submarine lurched upward with sudden, terrifying force. "We're moving," I called out, watching the digital depth gauge spin backward at an impossible rate. "The creature is... I think it's pushing us up." The submarine shot upward through the creature's throat, surrounded by a torrent of water, acidic fluid, and debris from other unfortunate vessels that had been trapped before us. The Erebus tumbled end over end, throwing crew members against walls and consoles. I gripped my station with white knuckles, fighting to stay in my seat as the vessel rolled and pitched. "Depth decreasing rapidly," I managed to call out between violent lurches. 3,000 feet, 2,000. We're ascending at nearly 40 knots. The external cameras, those that still functioned, showed a nightmarish tunnel of contracting flesh giving way to darkness, then to swirling water filled with chunks of partially digested matter. My stomach turned at the realization that we were being vomited out, exactly as Dr. Olson had predicted. A new wave of alarms cut through the chaos as system failures cascaded across all decks. The engineering readouts on my screen flashed critical warnings: reactor temperature rising beyond containment parameters, cooling systems failing, structural integrity compromised beyond recoverable limits. "Captain!" Milo's panicked voice came through the intercom. "The reactor containment is failing. The pulse overloaded the cooling systems, and the violent movement has ruptured primary coolant lines. We're initiating emergency shutdown, but..." The intercom cut out as another violent lurch threw us sideways. The main lights failed, plunging the bridge into darkness before emergency lighting kicked on, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. I watched helplessly as system after system went dark on my console. Navigation, propulsion, life support. All critical functions were shutting down or failing outright. The hull integrity monitor showed multiple breaches forming as the submarine's structure gave way under the stress of our violent ascent and the damage from the creature's digestive acids. "Reactor shut down complete," Mason's voice crackled over the emergency channel, strained and breathless. "But we've lost primary power throughout the vessel. Backup systems are compromised. We can't restore containment." Captain Marquez steadied herself against my console, blood trickling from a fresh cut on her forehead. She looked at the damage reports flooding in, then at the external feeds showing we were now in open water, still rising rapidly. "This vessel is lost," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos around us. Her eyes met mine for a brief moment before she reached for the ship-wide communication system. Her finger pressed down on the button with grim finality. "All hands. This is the captain. Abandon ship. Repeat. All hands abandon ship. Proceed immediately to your designated emergency pods. This is not a drill." The words hung in the air for a heartbeat before the bridge erupted into controlled urgency. Captain Marquez turned to me. "Chapman, help coordinate the evacuation. Get the injured to the nearest pods first." I nodded and pushed away from my useless console, stumbling as the submarine continued to pitch and roll, though less violently now. We were still rising, but the worst of the creature's expulsion seemed to be over. The bridge doors were jammed half open. I had to squeeze through the gap to reach the main corridor, where crew members were already moving with purpose toward the escape pods. I spotted Tiffany Morse helping a crewman with a badly gashed leg. "Let me help," I said, taking the injured man's other arm. Together we half-carried him down the corridor toward Pod Station 2. "Medical's completely flooded," Tiffany informed me as we moved. "We've lost all our supplies. There are at least 12 serious injuries that I know of." We reached the pod station where crew members were helping each other into the cramped emergency vessel. I counted heads, 8 people fitting into a pod designed for 10. "That's enough for this one," I said, helping to secure the injured crewman in his seat. "Get this pod away from the submarine. We don't know how much longer the hull will hold." Tiffany nodded, strapping herself in next to her patients. "What about you?" "I need to make sure everyone else gets out. There are still people on the lower decks." I didn't wait for her response before hitting the launch sequence. The pod's door sealed with a pneumatic hiss, and seconds later, it was gone, ejected safely away from our dying vessel. A tremendous groan of metal tore through the corridor, followed by the unmistakable sound of rushing water. I turned to see seawater pouring in from a new breach at the far end of the passage. The submarine was beginning to break apart. "Pod Station 3 is completely flooded," someone shouted from behind me. I turned to see Grace May, her uniform soaked and a nasty bruise forming on her cheek. "We need to redirect everyone to Stations 1 and 4. I nodded and hit the emergency comm panel on the wall. "Attention all hands. Pod Station 3 is compromised. Repeat, Pod Station 3 is compromised. All personnel report to Stations 1 or 4 immediately. The deck lurched beneath us, tilting at an alarming angle. More warning lights flashed along the corridor as automated bulkheads began to close, sealing off flooding compartments in a last-ditch effort to maintain buoyancy. "We need to move," I told Grace, pointing toward the forward section. "Station 1 is closest." We made our way through the tilting corridor, helping 2 more injured crew members as we went. The water was rising behind us, chasing us as we navigated around fallen equipment and through partially closed bulkheads. When we reached a junction, Grace pointed left. "I need to check engineering. Mason and the others might be trapped." "It's too dangerous," I started, but she was already moving. "I'll meet you at Pod Station 1, she called back. I hesitated, torn between following her and continuing forward with the injured crew members who needed my help. Duty won out. I guided the injured toward the forward section, trying not to think about how many of us might not make it off the submarine. The water was ankle deep by the time we reached Pod Station 1. Captain Marquez was there, directing crew members into the waiting pod. "Chapman," she acknowledged me with a nod. "Get them inside. This is the last pod in this section." I helped the injured crew into the pod, counting as they entered. The capacity was 10, and we were at 8, including the injured. "Where's Dr. Olson?" I asked, suddenly realizing the prisoner wasn't present. "Morse is bringing him," Captain Marquez replied grimly. "Last I heard, they were making their way from the brig." As if summoned by her words, Kenny Morse appeared at the end of the corridor, shoving Dr. Olson ahead of him. Olson's hands were still restrained, but he moved with surprising agility given the tilting deck and rising water. Kenny looked worse for wear. A deep gash ran along his temple, and he favored his right leg as he walked. "Captain," Kenny called out, his voice strained. "The aft section is completely flooded. I don't think anyone else is coming this way." "What about Pod Station 4? I asked, doing a mental count of the crew we'd accounted for. "Launched," Captain Marquez confirmed, checking her handheld tracker. 2 pods away, with 9 crew members each. Pod 2 launched with 8. She looked up at me. "With us, that accounts for everyone still alive." Relief washed over me. At least most of the crew had made it to the pods. But the feeling was short-lived, as another violent shudder ran through the submarine. The water was rising faster now, nearly at our knees. "Everyone in now," Captain Marquez ordered. I helped Kenny guide Olson into the pod, then assisted the security chief himself, noticing how he winced when I took his arm. Once inside, I saw the full extent of his injuries, not just the head wound and leg, but what looked like broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder. He'd clearly taken a beating during our violent ascent. "You should have said something," I told him as I helped him into a seat. "Getting the prisoner out was priority," he replied through gritted teeth. Captain Marquez was the last to enter, sealing the hatch behind her. The pod was cramped with 10 of us inside. The 4 injured crew members, 3 other crew members I recognized from various departments, Captain Marquez, Kenny, Dr. Olson, and myself. I moved to the control panel, initiating the pre-launch sequence. Through the pod's small viewport, I could see water rapidly filling the station we'd just left. The Erebus was in its death throes, breaking apart as water pressure found every weakness in its compromised hull. "Are we sure the other pods got away safely?" I asked, looking to Captain Marquez for confirmation. She nodded, checking her tracker again. "All 3 pods are at safe distance and ascending. We're the last ones." The relief I felt was genuine. Despite everything, most of us had survived. I turned back to the controls, finalizing the launch sequence. Behind me, I heard a pained gasp. Turning, I saw Kenny Morse's face had gone deathly pale. Blood seeped through his uniform where he clutched his side. "Kenny?" Captain Marquez moved toward him, but it was too late. Kenny's eyes rolled back, and he slumped forward in his restraints. The movement was so sudden that no one reacted quickly enough to what happened next. Dr. Olson, who had been sitting quietly with his restrained hands in his lap, moved with startling speed. In one fluid motion, he reached for Kenny's sidearm, somehow slipping his hands free of the restraints I hadn't noticed were already loosened. Before anyone could stop him, Olson had the weapon in his hand and was backing away as much as the confined space allowed, the gun trained on Captain Marquez. "No one move," he said calmly, his voice a chilling contrast to the panic around us. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept over all of us before settling on the captain. "I believe this concludes our arrangement." My hand hovered over the launch controls as I stared at the weapon in Olson's hand. The submarine continued to break apart around our pod, and water was now visible through the viewport, threatening to flood the launch bay. With no choice left, I pressed the launch sequence. The pod shuddered, then shot away from the dying Erebus as Olson's gun remained steadily pointed at us. The pod's metal frame groaned as we shot away from the dying submarine. My fingers gripped the controls tightly, trying to stabilize our trajectory while keeping one eye on Olson. The gun in his hand remained steady, aimed directly at Captain Marquez's chest. His expression hadn't changed, the same cold calculation that had marked his face throughout our journey, even in his cell. "Keep us level," Olson said, his voice oddly calm against the chaos of alarms and the hissing of oxygen regulators. "I'd rather not die because of poor piloting after surviving that creature." I adjusted our ascent angle, fighting against the currents that threatened to send us spinning. The escape pod wasn't designed for precise maneuvering, just survival. Its stubby thrusters responded sluggishly to my commands, but I managed to level us out. Behind us, through the small viewport at the rear of the pod, I caught glimpses of the Erebus. The submarine that had been our home was breaking apart. Massive sections of hull plating tore away, trailing bubbles as they sank into the darkness. The forward section, where the bridge had been, crumpled inward as if crushed by an invisible fist. Even from this distance, I could see the lights flickering and dying throughout the vessel as compartment after compartment flooded. "She's going down fast," I said, more to myself than anyone else. Captain Marquez sat rigid on the bench opposite me, her eyes fixed on the viewport. Blood had dried on her temple from the earlier impact, but she showed no sign of pain. 8 other crew members were packed into the tight space of the pod, including Tiffany Morse, who was tending to her husband Kenny. He lay unconscious on the floor, his breathing shallow. "Such a waste of military hardware," Olson commented, glancing briefly at the sinking submarine. "Though I suppose it served its purpose." The Erebus continued its death spiral, descending deeper into the abyss. As I watched, something moved in the darkness below. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, shadows playing across the viewport. Then the water seemed to darken, as if a massive cloud had passed between us and the sub. "My God," I whispered. From the depths rose Charybdis. The creature that had swallowed us earlier now returned, its massive form blocking out what little light penetrated these depths. Its body was mostly hidden in shadow, but I could make out the circular maw, a ring of tissue larger than the submarine itself. Tentacle-like structures lined the opening, undulating with horrible purpose. The dying Erebus, still sinking, drifted directly toward that waiting mouth. The creature's maw expanded, tissue walls stretching to accommodate the meal. In a single terrible moment, the submarine was enveloped. The creature contracted around the vessel, crushing what remained of the hull. Metal screamed as it was compressed beyond its limits, and then the Erebus was gone, consumed completely. Charybdis lingered for a moment, its enormous bulk shifting in the water. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature descended back into the darkness, leaving only swirling currents and small pieces of debris in its wake. The pod rocked violently as the aftermath waves hit us. I gripped the control panel to steady myself, feeling the small vessel shudder around us. Several of the injured crew cried out as they were jostled against each other in the cramped space. "Fascinating," Olsen said, his eyes still fixed on the spot where the creature had vanished. He showed no fear, only scientific curiosity. "A perfect ambush predator. It creates the vortex to draw in prey, then returns to consume the disabled vessel. Evolutionary brilliance." "You seem awfully calm for someone who almost became that thing's dinner," Captain Marquez said, her voice tight with controlled anger. Olsen turned his attention back to us, the gun never wavering. "I'm alive, Captain, as are you thanks to my intervention. I consider that a successful outcome." "What happens now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Olsen smiled slightly. "Now? Now we wait. The pod's emergency beacon will activate automatically once we reach the surface. Standard protocol will bring rescue vessels. Once they arrive, I'll be departing." "You think they'll just let you walk away?" Captain Marquez asked. "I think they'll have little choice in the matter," Olsen replied, patting the gun. "But that's a concern for later. For now, Mr. Chapman, please focus on getting us to the surface safely." I turned back to the controls, checking our ascent rate. We were rising steadily at about 10 meters per minute. Slow, but safe. Too rapid an ascent could cause decompression sickness. The pod's systems were functioning normally, life support maintaining oxygen levels and temperature despite the damage we'd sustained during the escape. While adjusting the controls, I glanced at Captain Marquez. Our eyes met briefly, and something passed between us, a silent agreement. We needed a plan. Olsen might be holding the gun, but we still outnumbered him. If we could coordinate somehow. A slight movement caught my eye. On the floor, Kenny Morse's fingers twitched. His eyes remained closed, but the rhythm of his breathing had changed. He was regaining consciousness, but carefully hiding it from Olsen. Tiffany, still kneeling beside her husband, must have noticed too. Her hand squeezed his arm gently, a warning to stay still. I needed to buy time and create an opportunity. "I should check the emergency systems," I said, turning away from the main controls. "Make sure everything's ready for when we surface." Olsen nodded. "By all means. Just remember where my attention is focused, Mr. Chapman." I moved carefully around the cramped space, checking the various panels and systems built into the pod's walls. Oxygen recyclers, water purification, emergency rations, all functioning normally. As I moved, I positioned myself at different angles relative to Olsen, noting his posture and attention. He was alert but confident, holding the gun with practiced ease. Taking him by surprise would be difficult but not impossible. "How much air do we have?" Captain Marquez asked, clearly following my lead in creating distraction. "About 36 hours at current consumption rates," I answered, reading from the life support display. "Water recycling is at 90% efficiency. We'll be uncomfortable, but we'll survive until rescue arrives." As I spoke, I felt a subtle vibration run through the pod's frame. The emergency beacon had activated, broadcasting our location and distress call on all standard maritime and military frequencies. Any vessels within 200 nautical miles would receive the signal. Olsen seemed to notice it too. "Ah, the beacon. Excellent. Now we wait for our rescue party." "And then what?" Captain Marquez asked. "You think you can hold an entire rescue crew at gunpoint?" "I think I won't need to," Olsen replied. "One hostage will be sufficient for my purposes. The rest of you will remain here while I transfer to their vessel." As he spoke, I noticed Captain Marquez's eyes flick downward, toward the space beneath the control panel. Following her gaze as subtly as I could, I spotted the emergency kit strapped to the underside of the console. Standard issue for all escape pods, medical supplies, emergency rations, and distress equipment, including a flare gun. I moved back toward the main controls, positioning myself closer to the emergency kit. "Surface currents might be strong," I said, checking the external sensors. "We should prepare for turbulence when we breach." Olsen nodded absently, his attention momentarily shifting to the viewport. He scanned the horizon, perhaps looking for signs of approaching vessels or calculating our position. For just a second, his eyes left us. It was all the opening I needed. I lunged forward, dropping to one knee and ripping the emergency kit from its mounting. My fingers closed around the handle of the flare gun as Captain Marquez launched herself from her seat, driving her shoulder into Olsen's midsection with surprising force. Olsen staggered backward, the gun in his hand swinging wildly. I raised the flare gun, aiming at his face as Captain Marquez grappled with his gun arm, forcing it upward toward the ceiling of the pod. I barely registered the chaos that followed. The moment Captain Marquez had knocked Olsen off balance, Kenny Morse, who'd been slumped against the pod wall looking half dead, suddenly sprang into action. Despite his injuries, he'd tackled Olsen from behind while I kept the flare gun trained on him. The struggle was brief, but violent. By the time we'd secured Olsen with the emergency restraints from the pod's supply locker, all three of them were bleeding from fresh wounds. That had been 3 hours ago. Now I sat on a bench seat of the Navy rescue vessel that had picked up our distress beacon, my back against the cool metal bulkhead. My uniform was stiff with dried seawater and sweat. Every muscle in my body felt like it had been stretched to its breaking point and then twisted for good measure. I hadn't slept in over 30 hours. Across from me, 2 medics worked on Captain Marquez. She sat upright on a gurney, wincing occasionally as they cleaned the gash on her temple and bandaged her wrist. During our struggle with Olsen, she'd been slammed against the pod controls but had kept fighting. Now she looked almost peaceful, though her eyes remained alert, watching everything happening around us. "Just a sprain, Captain," one of the medics said, wrapping her wrist in a compression bandage. "You're lucky it's not broken." "Luck had nothing to do with it," she replied, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. I understood what she meant. We hadn't survived by luck. We'd survived by skill, training, and sheer determination, and by working together when it mattered most. My gaze drifted to the far end of the compartment where Dr. Olsen sat surrounded by 4 armed guards. His hands were secured with heavy-duty cuffs, his ankles shackled to the floor bolts. His face was bruised from our struggle, a split lip leaving a smear of dried blood on his chin. Even now, he maintained that eerie composure, his eyes calmly surveying the room, as if he were a tourist on a cruise ship, rather than a prisoner being returned to maximum security. Our eyes met briefly across the compartment. He smiled slightly, nodding as if acknowledging a worthy opponent. I looked away, unsettled by his lack of anger or frustration. He'd come so close to escaping, had actually believed he'd succeeded, only to be thwarted at the last moment. Yet he showed no signs of disappointment, just that same calculating patience. Kenny Morse caught my attention by clearing his throat. He sat a few feet away, his shoulder heavily bandaged. The bleeding that had made him appear so weak in the escape pod had come from a deep cut he'd received during the evacuation, but it hadn't been as life-threatening as Olsen had assumed. Kenny had played possum, waiting for the right moment to act. Now he gave me a tired smile, raising his cup of water in a mock toast. "Hell of a day at the office," he said. I returned his smile, nodding in agreement. "You had me convinced you were half dead." "Wasn't entirely an act," he replied, wincing as he shifted position. But I figured our friend over there wouldn't be watching me too closely if he thought I was out of commission. Captain Marquez glanced our way. Quick thinking, Morse. You should consider a career in theater when you retire. No thanks, Captain. I think I've had enough drama for one lifetime. I leaned my head back against the bulkhead, letting my eyes close for a moment. The rescue vessel's engines hummed steadily beneath us, pushing us toward the mainland at top speed. After our pod had breached the surface, it had taken almost 2 hours for the rescue team to locate us. 2 hours of watching the horizon, wondering if Charybdis might return to finish what it had started. Nearby, 3 crew members from the rescue vessel huddled around a monitoring station, their conversation pulling me from my thoughts. They were reviewing data collected when they'd arrived at our coordinates. I've never seen readings like this, one of them said, tapping the screen. That biological signature is off the charts. Could be a pod of whales, another suggested. Or maybe a giant squid migration. The third shook his head. No way. Look at the density pattern. And that movement signature. Whatever it was, it's unlike anything in our database. Command's going to want a full report on this, the first one said. Might need to send a research vessel back out there. I nearly laughed at the thought. Let them send a research vessel. Let them search the depths. They wouldn't find Charybdis unless it wanted to be found. And if it did find them, well, they'd need more than scientific instruments to survive that encounter. The rescue vessel's captain approached, clipboard in hand. He'd been taking statements from the survivors, piecing together what had happened to the Erebus. When he reached me, he hesitated. Lieutenant Chapman, right? Navigation officer? I nodded, straightening up. Mind if I ask you a few more questions? Your account doesn't quite match up with some of the others. How so? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Well, you mentioned some kind of creature, a biological entity that attacked your submarine. But the other reports suggest a natural phenomenon, perhaps an underwater landslide or an unexpected current. I glanced toward Captain Marquez, who gave me a barely perceptible nod. I was at the navigation console when it happened, I said carefully. What I reported is what I observed. He made a note on his clipboard. And this creature, you called it Charybdis? That's what Dr. Olson called it, I replied, named after the mythological sea monster. The captain frowned. Yes, well, I'm sure the debriefing team will want to discuss this in more detail when we reach the mainland. As he walked away, I knew what would happen. Our reports would be collected, analyzed, and then quietly classified. The official explanation would involve mechanical failure, perhaps human error. There would be no mention of a creature large enough to swallow a nuclear submarine. No record of the graveyard of ships we'd seen inside its digestive tract. Some things were simply too incredible for official acknowledgement. I felt the weight of the past 24 hours pressing down on me. We had survived not only one of the most dangerous creatures on the planet, but also one of the most dangerous humans. I'd piloted a submarine deeper than any vessel in our fleet was rated to go, witnessed a legendary sea monster, helped jury-rig a nuclear reactor to emit an electromagnetic pulse, and faced down an armed sociopath in an escape pod. Any one of those events would have been the most extraordinary experience of my life. Together they seemed impossible, like something from a fever dream. A commotion near the communications station drew everyone's attention. One of the officers was pointing excitedly at a screen. We've got land on the radar. ETA to coastline approximately 45 minutes. A subtle release of tension rippled through the compartment. Even the guards around Olson seemed to stand a little straighter. Land meant safety, security, an end to this nightmare. Captain Marquez dismissed the medics and made her way over to sit beside me. For a long moment, she said nothing, just stared straight ahead. "No one's going to believe us," she finally said, her voice low. "About what really happened down there." "No," I agreed. "They won't. The official report will blame equipment failure, maybe cite extreme depth pressure affecting the hull integrity. There will be an investigation, recommendations for improved safety protocols. But no mention of Charybdis." She shook her head. "Some truths are too big, Chapman, too disruptive. The Navy can't acknowledge a sea monster capable of taking down a nuclear submarine. Can you imagine the panic?" I looked around at the survivors scattered throughout the compartment. Grace May sat with her brother Mason, both of them speaking in low voices. Tiffany Morse was checking on an injured crew member. Mildred Walker stared out a small porthole, lost in her own thoughts. "It doesn't matter if they believe us or not," I said. "We know what happened. We were there." Captain Marquez nodded slowly. "Yes, and that's something no classified report can ever take away." I moved to the nearest porthole and looked out at the ocean passing beneath us. From up here, the water looked so peaceful, so ordinary. Sunlight sparkled off gentle waves. Nothing about that blue expanse suggested the horrors lurking in its depths. How many other secrets did the ocean keep? How many other creatures like Charybdis existed in unexplored trenches and abyssal plains? For centuries, sailors had told stories of sea monsters and leviathans, only to be dismissed as superstitious or drunk. Now I understood those tales differently. They weren't myths or exaggerations. They were warnings. I pressed my palm against the cool glass of the porthole. The others on the rescue vessel, the crew, the medics, even the captain, they saw only the surface. They couldn't comprehend what we'd experienced. No one who hadn't been inside the Erebus when Charybdis attacked could truly understand. That shared experience created a bond between the survivors, something that would connect us long after the official reports were filed and forgotten. We had seen the impossible together, we had fought it together, and somehow, against all odds, we had survived together. The coastline appeared on the horizon, a thin, dark line between sea and sky. I stared at the ocean's surface one last time, so deceptively calm and ordinary now, hiding the incredible dangers we faced in the Strait of Judgment below.